Hey there, my name is Terry with True Marie Soapworks, and I'm excited to welcome you back to my channel. I know it's been a while. I want to share with you the making of this watermelon soap that I made for the June of 2023 soap challenge. That challenge is hosted by Amy Warden. I'll give a link in the description below if you're interested in more information about the soap challenge. As I take you through the making of this watermelon soap, I will be giving you tips along the way, and two other topics I'm going to tackle are titanium dioxide and give a few tips on how to avoid getting the specks when you cut your soap and the smears from the undissolved titanium dioxide. Also, I will be talking about soda ash and how to prevent it. I've learned a few things along the way and I will be glad to share them with you, so stay tuned and let's get started. To start off, I'm measuring the water and I'm using 1/3 to 1/2 of the water weight in distilled water ice cubes, and then I top off the remaining water weight with cold distilled water. The next ingredient is sodium hydroxide. Keep in mind that it can be dangerous if not handled properly, so if you're new to soap making, make sure you understand all the safety precautions and wear the proper safety gear when dealing with this caustic substance. The next ingredient is sodium lactate. It's a natural hardener for your soap. I use it at a rate of 1 teaspoon per pound of oils. Next, I add the sodium hydroxide to the water very carefully, and I stir right away and make sure that it doesn't form a crust on the bottom of the container. If that happens, it's very hard to get it incorporated after that. Once that's dissolved, I take that and the sodium lactate and I set that in a well-ventilated area that's safe for many kids or pets. The sodium lactate doesn't need ventilated, but I set these two together just to remind me to add the sodium lactate to the cooled lye water. The next ingredient is lard. Lard is a good ingredient to help your batter stay fluid. Lard is high in oleic, palmitic, and stearic acids. The palmitic and stearic acids help your soap to be a hard bar, but not have the drying effects that lauric and myristic acids can have. Next we have coconut oil. Now coconut oil is high in lauric and myristic acids, so it contributes to the hardness of the bar, but it can be drying if you use it at too high of a rate. So it's suggested that you use it under 30% of your oils and also adjust your superfat accordingly. Next, I microwave these two ingredients until they're barely melted but completely melted. In the meantime, I measure the castor oil and the olive oil. Castor oil helps the lather be more stable, and olive oil is known for its moisturizing qualities. Next, we have a really useful tip that was shared by Amy of the Soap Challenge, and she learned it from Claudia Carpenter, so thank you to Amy and Claudia for this tip. It is to use a 50-50 mixture of black raspberry, vanilla, and cucumber melon. And that makes a passable watermelon fragrance, and the good thing about it is that it doesn't accelerate. A lot of the watermelon fragrances that I have tried misbehave in some way, whether they discolor or accelerate, and this one doesn't either, so it was a very good one to use with this recipe and these techniques. Here we have cocoa butter. I love using the wafers as you see here from Wholesale Supplies Plus, or also I've used the pastilles from Brambleberry, which are both really easy to work with. I like these kinds because they are easy to measure and easy to melt. Otherwise you have big chunks of hard cocoa butter, which is extremely hard to work with. Alright, let me take you through my color selections. I'm using colors today from Nurture Soap, and I'm using combinations. There will be 7 colors total, but some of those colors are made up of 2 or 3 colors. For this first one, this is the outer part of the rind. This would be the darker green, and I'm using 8% of the batter. I'm using the Force of Nature at a rate of 1.5 teaspoons per pound of oils, and then I use the full throttle at 1/2 teaspoon per pound of oils. And you will see later that I add 1/2 teaspoon per pound of oils of Synergy that I forgot to add here. The next layer of the rind is kind of a more yellow green. For this one, I'm using 8% of the batter as well, and this is 1.5 teaspoons per pound of oils of the full throttle, and then 1/2 teaspoon per pound of oils of the neon green. In my Facebook group, I asked if anybody had any questions, and there are 2 questions I'm going to address here, and one is about titanium dioxide and trying to get rid of the specks. You can disperse titanium dioxide in water, however, I like to disperse it in oil, and the reason is that I like to be able to hand stir my colorants into the batter instead of having to stick blend them into the batter. And that water in oil tends to need to be stick blended in, or it just doesn't have as nice of a consistency. So for mixing it with oils, it is very difficult to get those clumps out, and I have found that the best way to do that is to use a Ziploc bag. I always use a 3-to-1 ratio, so that's 3 parts olive oil to 1 part titanium dioxide. So if I'm mixing up 1/4 of a cup of titanium dioxide, I use 3/4 of a cup of olive oil. And I put that in a gallon Ziploc bag and just use my hand and slide that top layer of the bag across the bottom layer of the bag, and I work that until it's mixed up. Oftentimes, I'll get it ready a little before I need it, and I'll just throw it on the counter. And every time I walk past it, I agitate it a little more, and it's usually ready by the time I need it. You can tell very easily if there's specks still left. And once I'm done and I have it all incorporated, I put it into a liner, into a squeeze bottle. Once it's in there, I add a few new sterile stainless steel nuts or bolts, and that works as an agitator because it will settle out, but then it's easier to incorporate since it's already been incorporated and saturated with oil. Along those same lines, another option that you could use to avoid having to mix out those little specks in titanium dioxide is to use a white mica. Here I'm using a mica called Winter White from Nurture Soap, and they recommend using it at 3 teaspoons per pound of oils to get that true white. Now, of course, there are other factors that go into the whiteness of your batter, such as the oils or the fragrance you use, so keep that in mind. But this is another option. It's much easier to mix in, and you don't get a lot of clumps. Now, you may think that 3 teaspoons per pound of oils is a lot, but did you know that in micas, the typical amount of pigment, which is actual color, is only around 5 to 15%. That means that the remaining 85 to 95% is the carrier for the colorant or the filler, which is mica. Many of the white micas use a synthetic mica called fluorphlogopite instead of the regular mica because it is naturally whiter. The regular mica tends to be more yellow in color. The percentage that I used for the white was 15% of the batter, and I used 2 teaspoons per pound of oils for this color. I didn't really care to use the 3. It didn't matter to me that it was a true white. The next 4 colors I'm making are different shades of red. For this first one, I'm using Trial by Fire Mica, and I'm using it at a rate of 2 teaspoons per pound of oils, and this is for 20% of my batter. For the watermelon, this would be the color directly on top of the white, and I found that I could dial this color back a bit from the original 2 teaspoons per pound of oils. For my next red, I'm using Neon Red, and I'm also using it at a rate of 2 teaspoons per pound of oils, and I'm using it for 30% of my batter. This will be the middle red color, and this is the biggest percentage of the watermelon. This was my favorite of the reds that I made, although I still feel like I could dial back the color usage rate a little bit. Nurture Soap shows their samples at a usage rate of 2 teaspoons per pound of oils for their neons and their micas. And remember earlier I told you about the filler in micas. Well, neons, it's not quite as much. It's usually 10 to 20% filler. So that means that in neon colorants, typically there's about 80 to 90% pigment in those, so you can see why you wouldn't have to use as much as with the micas. And for neons, I usually just use 1 teaspoon per pound of oils, and it's plenty. Here's my third red, and I was going for more of a pink. This is called Queen of Hearts mica. I use it at a rate of 2 teaspoons per pound of oils, and I use it for 11% of my batter. Now, I wanted more of a pink red, and I got more of a red, so I would also dial this back a little bit for the next time. This last red color is actually the color I'm using for the seeds, and I'm using this brick dust mica at a rate of 2 teaspoons per pound of oils, and then I use the black pearl mica to darken it up a bit. And I underestimated the amount of black that I needed just because I normally darken my colors with activated charcoal. And remember what I said about micas, how they only have about 5 to 15% pigment. Well, so I needed to use 3 times as much as I had originally planned. So I originally planned on using 1.15 cc scoop, and I ended up using 3. The percentage of the whole batch for the seeds I figured at 8%. Now I don't use 8% for the seeds, but I need 8% because when you're doing the mini drop swirl, you have to have some in the squeeze bottle for it to be somewhat full, because you need it not to sputter as you're dragging that tip of the squeeze bottle through the batter. You need it to have batter behind it. So that's why I estimated the 8%, and it's overestimation and you'll have some left. As I said earlier, I forgot to add that Synergy mica to the first green color, so this is that 0.5 teaspoon per pound of oils of Synergy. I'm making my watermelon slices in this half-cylinder silicone mold from Brambleberry. I used 2 of those molds to create enough slices for this design. I'm using squeeze bottles to make my tiger swirl design, and I've also put extension tips on all of them. I have a video talking about how to line your squeeze bottles and make tips for the extensions, so if you're interested, check that out. At this point, I add the fragrance to the liquid oils. It's only okay to do this now if you know that your fragrance is known not to accelerate. Next, I add the liquid oils to the melted hard oils, and I pour down the side of the pitcher just to avoid adding in any air bubbles. After that, I add the sodium lactate to the cooled lye solution, and then I add the lye solution to the melted oils. Here I'm writing down all the percentages that I need to figure for dividing this batter, and then I have to figure out the weight of the batter that I have. And I do that by zeroing the scale with the spatula on it, and by doing that I only weigh the bowl in the batter. Then I subtract off the weight of the bowl and I get the weight of the batter. So here the bowl and the contents weigh 2,966 and my bowl weighs 1,580. I subtract that and I get the weight of the batter, and then I multiply that by each of the percentages to get the weights in grams. Keep in mind that I round down, because when I round up I tend to have that last division be a little short. That is because there's a little waste that sticks to the bowl or the spatula, so when I round down I usually get a more accurate number at the end that it works out just right. But if you add my numbers up here, you won't get that 1386 that you see just because of that rounding down. I decided to use the scale to put my colors in the mold because I wanted to get an accurate proportion of each of the colors, at least to start with. Each of the cavities of the mold hold 4.75 ounces, which is 134 grams. So within that 134 grams, I figured out the percentages, and then I calculated what they would be when added to each other. So 8% is 11, and then 8% again is 11, so that would be 22, and so on. Here I begin to stick blend and try to get this batter to an emulsion, and let me tell you, with these fragrances, this batter really was slow moving. I've clipped out a lot of the stick blending just for time's sake. There's a fine line in between knowing when to stop stick blending and how much time you're going to have to actually divide off the batter and mix the colors and get it into the squeeze bottles. Here I decided to start dividing the batter before it was completely emulsified because I had a lot to do. And I needed that batter to be thin enough so that when I added the next batter that it could displace it and cause it to migrate up the side of the mold to create that rind of the watermelon. Now it's time to add the color to the batter. Now that we have the colors mixed in, I go ahead and put them in lined squeeze bottles. And you can see here that the batter still is not quite at an emulsion. You can see on the edge of that container that it's still a little grainy looking. It doesn't look like a thin, even film. In retrospect, I had plenty of time to work, but this was my first experience with this fragrance combination, and it was better to be safe than sorry. Now that it's in the squeeze bottles, it's just a waiting game, so I had a little time to do some dishes and some cleaning up while I waited for it to get to an emulsion or a very light trace. I'm numbering these bottles just to eliminate any confusion while I'm pouring. I do have some reds that are very close in color, so this will help me get them in the right order. Alright, the batter is ready to pour now, and I put the silicone mold on a cutting board on the scale and zeroed it out, and then I used the weights that I came up with before so I could just pour one melon at a time. And I did that until I was comfortable with it, and then later I decided I didn't need the scale anymore. When you're pouring batter like this, one name for this technique is a tiger swirl, where you're just hoping the batter kind of dips down in the middle and goes to the side. As your batter gets thicker though, sometimes it just wants to go over the top and not push down and out. It's very important that you pour the batter quickly and don't have too much time in between when you pour one batter and the next. That's why I started off pouring each melon individually. And then as I got more comfortable, I went ahead and did several at a time because I could do them rather quickly. As you're watching, notice that the last color I pour in each cavity is the dark color, which is the seeds. I'm using a technique called mini drop swirl. I have a video on that if you're interested, but it involves taking the tip of the squeeze bottle and dragging it underneath the surface of the soap, and you get kind of a teardrop shape. And I made 5 passes to get 5 little seed shapes in each of the melons. So enjoy the pouring of these little watermelon slices, and I actually use another mold and pour another mold until I'm out of batter, but I don't show it here just because you get the idea. But do stick with me because I want to show you what happened while I was waiting for this soap to kind of lose that shiny glossy finish and to get the more dull finish. Before I oven process my soap, I let it sit there until it loses that shiny, glossy finish, that wet soap look. And this is what happened when I let mine sit. I was so worried that it was separating, but the next day it formed a little soda ash, which I kind of expected because I poured the batter at such a thin trace, but it really was only on the top and I was able to plane that off. So stay tuned for some tips on avoiding soda ash. After I unmolded these, I cut a little sliver off of each end just to see what they look like inside because the greens and yellows didn't quite get to the end, so they looked a little better inside, and I was pretty happy with the way they came out. The length of the half cylinder is 3 inches. And so I cut the little slivers off the end, so that was making them less than 3 inches. And then I kind of eyeballed cutting them in half. I got an end depth of these watermelon slices to be a little less than 1.5 inches. I want my soap to be around 1 inch thick, so I'm going to have to do a little planing just to clean them up and level them off. After that, I have to plane off the top surface of these little watermelon slices just to get a better surface for that turquoise batter to stick to. The soda ash wouldn't make a very good surface to meld together. At this point, I have fun arranging these little watermelon slices until I'm happy with the arrangement. I have 2 of these molds, and they're both the same size. One's from Nurture, one's from Brambleberry. If you're interested, Nurture Soap calls theirs the 11-pound slab mold, and Brambleberry calls theirs the 18-bar slab mold. I've already prepared my batter for the turquoise soap, and for each of these recipes that I did, for the watermelon slices and for this turquoise batter, I used the same amount of base oils. I used 33.5 ounces of base oils, and that's the normal amount I use for my 10-inch loaf mold as well. Here we have 2 days later, and I'm unmolding the soap, and I'm really happy with how it came out. There's a few little holes in the bottom, which I will fix later. Let's get on to the cutting. I cut this in kind of a weird fashion because of the size of my boxes, so I cut a strip off the end that would make some vertical bars, and then I cut the other ones horizontally in the same fashion. So it makes 14 bars and a little square one in the corner. The cutter that I'm using today is from Custom Craft Tools. It's called a Caterpillar, and I really love it. Custom Craft Tools sponsored the soap challenge for this month, and they are so very generous, so we appreciate that. This cutter comes in really handy when you're breaking up a slab mold. I used to use several different tools, and this one has solved all those problems. It's like a 3-in-1. You can plane, you can cut vertically, you can cut horizontally, so I love it. Now let's talk about soda ash. Soda ash is that white film that you see that forms on the surface of the soap and sometimes throughout the bar. First of all, soda ash is not harmful. It's perfectly fine. It's just as soap makers, we hate to see it. It covers up the beautiful soap that's underneath. So anything we can do to mitigate that would be wonderful. So what is the reaction that is happening? The reaction is the combination of carbon dioxide and the surface of the soap being of a high alkalinity. So that high alkalinity reacts with the carbon dioxide and it forms that soda ash. Moisture, particularly moisture on the surface of the soap, can facilitate that reaction. It doesn't cause the reaction, but it facilitates it. There are a few things you can do to minimize soda ash. One of them is to use isopropyl alcohol and spray it on the surface. I've never had much luck with that, but the idea is that you spray it on and it forms a film that will seal off the surface and cause the carbon dioxide not to react with that high alkalinity on the surface. The problem is that I use 91% isopropyl alcohol, so that means that the remaining 9% of the alcohol is water. So when you spray that on, and then the alcohol evaporates, you're left with water on the surface. So I have suspected that that causes soda ash. So I don't use isopropyl alcohol to prevent soda ash. Now, if you use the 99% isopropyl alcohol, you may not have the trouble. And also, I have a feeling that I sprayed too much. It sounds like you only have to spray a light mist on the surface. You can spray too much, and that could be bad for your soap also. It also causes other things. It can cause that alien brain looking surface, so you don't want that. So you can try this, just spraying alcohol, a fine mist, and if you can, use the 99% isopropyl alcohol. One thing that I have found that works best for me is to leave your molded soap open to air until it loses that really wet soap look, that shininess, and it gets more of a dull finish. At that point, you can cover it up, but by leaving it open to air helps any carbon dioxide that was trapped under the surface to dissipate naturally, and also some of that surface moisture has a chance to evaporate. That helps to minimize the conditions for soda ash formation. It's at this point that I cover my soap, but I cover it loosely. You're trying to let it breathe, but you also are trying to create a controlled environment. A little less carbon dioxide can get in there when it's covered like that. So at this point, I just cover it with something, but not airtight. And then I put it in the oven and oven process it. Now, oven processing doesn't do anything one way or another for soda ash, but that's just the way I do it. Just because of my water discount, I want it to go through gel. So the oven processing helps to nudge that through a full gel. When I'm finished with the oven processing, though, I let it come to room temperature naturally. Another reason why soda ash happens after you uncover the mold is because there's a difference in climate. Condensation happens because of those differences. And that moisture on the surface facilitates soda ash formation. So you're trying to eliminate any drastic changes in climate. Another way of helping those two climates equalize is to just crack the corner of your cover a little bit and let the air in slowly instead of that big whoosh of air as you take the whole top off immediately. Another way that you can get really extreme soda ash is when you pour your soap at a very thin trace. Sometimes that causes it to get deep within the soap. And the reason why that happens is because now that soap has to thicken, and that takes time. And all that extra time is time for that reaction to happen with the high alkalinity and the carbon dioxide. So you can try not to pour at such a thin trace, but as you saw for the watermelon slices that I did when I poured them into that half cylinder mold, I poured it at a really thin trace, and I was worried about it even separating, so you know it was at a thin trace. I feel that leaving it open to the air really helped it, and that took a while for it to lose its shine, but when it did, I then covered it loosely and oven processed it, and I feel that that helped. And I consider it a win that soda ash only just formed on the surface and didn't really affect it once it was planed off. Next, I go ahead and bevel the edges, and I also mend those little holes that happened in the back, and then the soap's ready to go to the curing rack. You can cure your soap for 4 to 6 weeks. That's the recommended amount for soap. I tend to go longer, but that's just a personal preference. If you're interested, I did a lather test at the end of the video because I was worried about the deepness of those red colors and to see what happens with the lather. And at the point I did the lather test, this bar was 4 weeks old. So stay tuned for that. Thank you so much for being here today, and I feel like we covered a lot. We covered soda ash formation and prevention. We covered titanium dioxide and a little bit about the amount of fillers in micas and neons. It's worth understanding these percentages and the amount of filler versus pigment or carrier versus pigment. In neons, you get the higher percentage of pigment versus the polyester 3, and in mica, you get a very low percentage of colorant or pigment versus the amount of mica. So if you missed that, go back and take a listen. Don't forget to stay tuned for the lather test. I'll show you what the suds look like. And thank you so much for watching. I hope you found this video helpful and inspiring. If you enjoyed it, please hit the thumbs up. That really helps support my channel, and it helps me to know that you enjoy the content that I create. If you have any questions, suggestions, or if there's a specific soap making technique or design you'd like to see in a future video, please leave a comment below. I love hearing from you, and I'm here to help. And don't forget to subscribe and hit the bell for notifications so that you don't miss any new content. By subscribing, you'll be a part of this wonderful soap making community. If you know someone who would enjoy this video, please feel free to share it with them. And thank you so much for being a part of Tree Marie Soapworks. I appreciate you all, and until next time, happy soaping.